slide deck, I'm going to talk to you about how some of our customers have taken some of their business processes that have been very laborious, search features and BI features. I'm going to really look at the forms generator, collaboration, and how that can be done within a portal. So here we're taking an intranet from one of our customers who's thinking about trying to produce a balanced scorecard. They have BI, they have a data warehouse, and they have charts, graphs, and scorecards which look at how they're delivering their activity and the price of their services. But it can be more difficult harvesting information about clinical quality. So what they've done is used SharePoint's workflow processes and task allocation features to say, okay, I've got to perform an audit of infection control. I'm going to do that by dividing my business up into teams. I'm going to give members within those teams jobs to do. I'm going to track how well those jobs have been done and whether they're complete or not. And I'm going to be quite prescriptive about what I mean by a job being complete. That's then going to generate, for people who've got jobs to do, workflow tasks. They can complete those tasks online. And so in this case, we're using SharePoint tasks, but they could equally well be Exchange email jobs. I'm going to collect my responses. I'm going to give people templates. I'm going to use content type functionality to really associate the right metadata with the content that I'm loading into my SharePoint site. I'm going to allow documentation to be uploaded. And when it is, I'm going to have a SharePoint view which is going to say, okay, what are the required actions to do this job? Who have I allocated them to? Who's done them? And where's the proof? And so in a very simple portal here, I've automated quite a labour-intensive process. I've collected some very good organisational knowledge. I've automated some workflow, and the result of it is that I can then go back and KPI how well my organisation is doing. So if you take that principle, you can then apply it to a number of different NHS problems. In this case, I'm going to look at the GP Appraisal and Revalidation system, which has been developed by 21C for NHS Nottinghamshire County, and is also in use in other PCTs, which is a commissioner body that sits in the NHS in the UK. So you can see that in this process, I've got a number of stakeholders. I've got people who manage lists of GPs, that's practices, and what clusters they belong to, and where they are, and what their interests might be. You can see I have appraisals to perform. You can see I've got to organise appraisers to perform that process, and I've got to take an overview, a management overview of what's happening, so I can make recommendations as to whether GPs are fit to continue in practice. That's quite a complicated thing to try and work out. If you're a medical director, you need to know quite a lot about a GP. You need to know where they are, what they do, what their special interests are, when was the last time they were validated, whether they have a particular special interest, so whether a GPWSI, whether they have any complaints about them, whether they've had any particular praise, and generally what their patients say about them. Using SharePoint and an underlying data warehouse, we enable the medical director to key in a GP's name and for the system to return everything we know about that GP. This is based on a series of views. So here you can see this is a register of all the GPs, and we're keeping the registration dates, the date of birth, which practice they belong to. And that's driven by an InfoPath form. So using InfoPath, we can collect information that's driven by a series of pick lists. In some cases, the information is mandatory. This was previously done on a paper form. Having that information electronically and maintaining it in an electronic view and making that data available to people with the right access permissions electronically using SharePoint has really helped automate what was very labour-intensive manual process. Sometimes the information isn't captured in forms. Sometimes it's more appropriate to hold it in Excel spreadsheets, for example. And in this case, we're maintaining this Excel spreadsheet using SharePoint. Because we're controlling access to this spreadsheet using SharePoint, we're trying to stop different versions of the truth promulgated around the organisation. Everybody's looking at the same thing. Then we have to maintain information about the appraisers, and in this case we do that again through an InfoPath form, and we keep a view which has a directory of the appraisers and the appraisals, and we have a form that manages the appraisal. So we've got all that information in one place in SharePoint, and we can use the native BI functionality within SharePoint to then do a bit of analysis. So in this case, we're looking at the appraisals that have been done by the appraisers, and we can obviously right-click on any of these bars and drill down through the detail. So there's an OLAP cube that sits underneath this, and the measures are things like the appraisals that have been done, and the dimensions you want to cut them by are which appraiser did them, who was appraised, when did it happen, which geographical location did it take place in. So all this is driven by a very small OLAP cube, but it's actually a very powerful management tool. We can also surface information about the appraisers in list format. So here we've got the reporting services report, which is just quite useful if you want a very simple canned report that you might want to print off and use on a regular basis. Using the OLAP cube, we can track the progress of the process. So you can see there are a number of appraisals that have been completed, but not all of them have had the appropriate forms filled in. So we're getting some quite sophisticated and detailed understanding here of what's actually happening in the process. We can also track the costs. So each of the appraisers will fill in a travel and subsistence claim in relation to the work that they've done, and it's helpful to be able to understand how much the appraisal process is costing. Of course, the appraisal process requires quite a degree of scheduling. Trying to match up an appraiser and an appraisee can be quite difficult. So in this case, we're using SharePoint to trigger email alerts to appraisers and appraisees to say, guys, your appraisal's coming up, get in touch with each other. So here I've just shown you two very straightforward examples of how SharePoint is being used to automate a business process to enable you to harvest business intelligence from operational processes, and how you can solve two very specific problems with the strategic, flexible solution that is SharePoint, and that's what 21C have done. We have a number of these available, these offerings, and there'll be videos to explain what they all do in due course. But if you go and look at our website, www.21c.it, you will see how a number of organisations have used different configurations of SharePoint that we've built for them to solve a wider range of NHS problems. Thank you very much for your time and attention.